and longer spells of rain with temperatures up to 12 Celsius. Similar on Sunday, showers and mild air in the south, cold further north with some hill snow.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello, it's 8 o'clock. I'm Alistair Stewart. On the show tonight, the crisis of 2022, keeping warm and keeping the lights on as the price cap is poised to rise by 50%. And have we turned a corner on COVID with even better news on Omicron hospitalisation risks? Can our health service begin to get back to normal? All of that and more coming up, but first, a full news update with Polly Middlehurst.
Good evening. These are your latest news headlines on GB News. 119,789 people have tested positive for COVID over the last 24-hour period. That's the highest level since the pandemic began. And it marks an increase of 13,000 from yesterday's record. Meanwhile, the UK Health Security Agency research appears to show that an individual with Omicron is up to 45% less likely to attend A&E and 70% less likely to be admitted into hospital. But they cautioned, due to Omicron's faster transmission rate, that may mean more people need hospitalisation. Dr. Andrew Preston told GB News there are still many unknowns about Omicron.
It does appear, at least in the cases we've seen, as you've just stated, that you do have a reduced risk of ending up in hospital if you do catch Omicron. But on the flip side, you've got a far greater risk of catching it in the first place. So how those two balance out as it spreads through into the older population, those with comorbidities, we still just don't know, I'm afraid.
Well, Scotland's Deputy First Minister says nightclubs will be closed in the country for at least 3 weeks from December the 27th. That comes on top of measures announced earlier this week by Nicola Sturgeon, which saw the return of additional restrictions, including the requirement for 1 metre social distancing and a maximum capacity of 100 people standing at an indoor event. Those measures are thought to impact around 150 nightclubs across the country. They now won't be able to operate without the appropriate social distancing between groups and table service. International news, and the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has urged Russia to enter talks over its military build-up on the border with Ukraine. It comes after the Russian president said he doesn't want conflict with Ukraine, but called for no further expansion of NATO eastward. He's been speaking at his annual news conference in Russia. Meanwhile, Western powers fear Russia is preparing to invade Ukraine as early as the beginning of next year, which Putin denies. Here, members of an organised crime group who stole thousands of pounds in a series of ram raid burglaries have been jailed. 5 men were sentenced after pleading guilty to conspiring to burgle 3 premises in Westminster last year. Officers were able to identify them using evidence from CCTV, phone records and automated number plate recognition. Clarence House has confirmed the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall are going to spend Christmas Day with Her Majesty the Queen at Windsor Castle. It will be the Queen's first year without her husband, Prince Philip, who died in April. Buckingham Palace has also confirmed that a service of thanksgiving for the life of the Duke of Edinburgh will take place next spring at Westminster Abbey. You're right up to date. Now let's get back to Alistair Stewart.
Thanks, Polly. When I tweeted that we were going to be talking about energy prices tonight, my Twitter feed went absolutely nuclear, ballistic, all of the above. So some background first. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. Once upon a time, there were power stations, coking plants to fuel them, and local electricity boards. The smell was awful, but the prices reasonable. They might not have been very efficient commercially, but they weren't profit-fueled. They were a sort of public service. Then, in 1979, along came Margaret Thatcher and privatisation. The list that she targeted was staggering. There were great industries and utilities, many in public ownership since the days of Clement Attlee's post-war government. They were all flogged off like the family silver, as even Tory patrician Harold Macmillan observed. Steel, railways, airlines, airports and aerospace all went to the highest bidder. And from the utilities, telecoms and water went, as did, and here's the rub, gas and electricity. Now, make no mistake, it was an economic revolution to which the objectors were profound. These were services for the people, owned by the people. But Thatcher was on a mission with a majority. To her, it was part of her wake-up call to a dormant, complacent UK economy. For the power generators and distributors, fresh problems, however, quickly loomed, not least with a series of oil crises as the Arab-dominated OPEC ramped up prices to fill their treasuries and to build on their political leverage. If you want our product, they said, you must pay more and you must be nicer to us. Now, we had our own oil in the North Sea, but unlike the Scandinavians, we left it to the multinationals to exploit, and we didn't even build up a sovereign wealth fund. We stayed warm with the lights on, but Shell, BP and the rest of them made huge profits and paid out huge dividends to their shareholders and pension funds. We paid the prices that they levied. There was, as Thatcher also observed, no alternative. The gradual realisation that coal and oil were major contributors to global warming saw a significant and growing shift to wind power and other renewables. But the distribution is still in private hands, as is the pricing of electricity, however it is produced. Be the fuel coal, coke, oil or wind, the private companies generating the electricity call the shots. Now, a few years later, it was Labour's Ed Miliband who first came up with the idea of a price cap, only to be pooh-poohed by the Tories. But, sensing the pinch that consumers were feeling from those endlessly rising prices, the Tories finally embraced the cap, and it was introduced in 2019 to be run by the regulator, Ofgem. Twice a year it rose a little or fell a little. However, as the global coronavirus has begun to fade, global activity has begun to return with a vengeance. So demand for energy from industry is soaring at home and abroad, and especially in the insatiable markets of China. In a brutal lesson of supply and demand, the prices have soared with that demand. So the cap to protect the poor old consumer has risen and risen. In October, about 15 million people saw their bills rise by 12%. It will go up again in April next year, and the industry is predicting it could be as much as 50%. Tragically, we, the consumer, are in the midst of a perfect storm. Not least because of that surge in industrial demand, energy prices have risen sharply and are at their highest levels. Wholesale gas prices have risen by some 500% this year alone. It's been a cold winter in Europe, and that's put further pressure on supplies. Stored supplies are down, and we've even cut back on our capacity to store liquid petroleum gas. Ironically, a calm and balmy summer meant less wind, and so less renewable cheap energy too. And finally, that little army of alternative start-up energy suppliers pledging cheaper prices, often via U-switch, have also fallen by the wayside. They too have been hit by rising prices, not enough capital, not enough forward buying in the markets, poor management, or frankly, a combination of all of the above. So tonight, what to do? Put simply, it is a brutal lesson in markets, supply and demand. Thatcher's mantras. And as the good lady also said, you can't buck markets. The cap is an attempt to do just that, and it's floundering, leaving consumers facing record bills next year. Add to all of that Russia's President Putin playing games once again with his energy supplies to the West for reasons of, just like the Arabs, political leverage and profit. And it couldn't get much worse. Except it could. People could go cold and lose their lighting if they fail to pay. Many will say the state has to intervene, and that takes us back to square one. The power companies say green levies and VAT account for a huge amount of the price. Government could cut them, but that would be at a cost to the Treasury and to the public finances. The Americans have done better, not least by letting fracking rip. But not all are in favour of that, pointing to alleged costs to the environment. So, you live with the system and you suffer, or you change the system and go back to state control and state ownership. I'm not at all sure that there's a majority for that right now in this country. But that may change in the spring of 2022. It really is that profound a challenge. So let's try and face up to that challenge, and my first guest is Adam Scorer. Adam is the Chief Executive of the National Energy Action Group, which is a fuel poverty charity. Good to see you, Adam. In terms of protecting consumers, do you accept that the cap is now a busted flush?
Well, the cap was never meant to protect all consumers. It was brought in to help those people who didn't want to switch in the market, people who were paying what was called a loyalty premium. So it was never about making the price affordable for all. But the price cap, as you've rightly said, that's just held the dam a little bit from the lower price rises up until August in order to be able to reflect the global price of gas that's hit the whole of the global economy. It is going to skyrocket. We're often accused of hyperbole and over-talking issues, but this is a catastrophe that's hurtling towards us, and especially consumers on the lowest incomes and also in the least efficient homes. That's the third element that people often forget. It's not just about people's incomes. It's not just the size of the bills. It's the fact that the homes in the UK lose heat faster than anywhere else in Europe. We have a lousy, energy inefficient housing stock, and that's why people have to use so much of the stuff.
Indeed.
And that's why their bills are absolutely out of control.
I'm not accusing you of hyperbole, as I hope I made crystal clear in that introduction. But let me take you back one step in that neat analysis of yours. If you go back to suppliers and principally gas, my second question to you is, do you also accept there that you can't buck markets? There is nothing Her Majesty's government or we consumers can do to affect the price of raw materials?
No, you can't buck the global gas market. It's a commodity market. We've seen tankers turn around in the middle of the Atlantic and Pacific to go where the price is bet. No, you can't buck that. But what you do, especially in essential services like energy, as you do with financial service and transport and other services, is you regulate it. And you regulate it in the interests of consumers. And what we've had is a regulatory system that's valued choice, 70 odd suppliers offering various types of different innovation, rather than focus on good levels of customer service, reasonably affordable prices, and from where I'm sitting, good protections for those people in the most vulnerable position. That's where we've got the ideology.
Adam, at the heart of my analysis, Adam, at the heart of my analysis is that the regulation simply doesn't work. When you've got a cap introduced, and I accept your analysis that's going to see the average price rise to £2,000 next year in April, just 4 months away. And secondly, where you've got this huge number of bulbs and pures and lovely little start-up companies to give competition in the market. That was a lifting of regulation. They've all gone bust because they're not up to the standard or they're not buying forward. Regulation does not work.
Regulation does work. Regulation has to work. What we've had is the global price put the hose through the market. And it's got rid of bad companies and it's got rid of some good ones. The principle of regulation in these markets should be about the interests of consumers, not some vague idea about let's get some more suppliers in the market. What we haven't had is the sort of regulation that is proportionate in a market like that. And who suffers the most? The people who suffer the most are those who are least able to afford the price of gas. So actually, I don't disagree with a lot of what you're saying, but we need tougher, customer-focused regulation. But what we do need, what we had at the moment, is something. We've had price spikes before. People have been cold when the energy companies were nationalized, as there are in private. That's not new. We have price rises. What we have now is we can see it coming, and we've got time to respond. And that means long-term in the way we frame regulation, but it also means intervening now. And I do think it's something where the government should intervene for those on the lowest incomes and in the least efficient homes, for whom this will be a hammer blow. And not just in the spring, throughout the rest of the year. So it's about immediate financial assistance for those people who will be ruined, better levels of regulation, and then energy efficiency across homes.
OK, got you on that. I don't want to get an argument about it, but I honestly, hand upon heart, don't think that you stand a chance of regulating Putin or the Saudis or Shell and BP. But let's park that.
This is the point. And this is the point that's made, Alistair. It's not.
But they're the ones who control the supply. They're the ones who control the price. They're the ones who need a cap.
What you do is you regulate the way in which prices are structured. And you do that in such a way that you have greater levels of protection for consumers and less permissive activities for suppliers. But you are right. You do not regulate Putin. You do not regulate the LNG market. You do not regulate demand in China. You cannot do that. That is why these prices would be present if this was a nationalized industry, as it is in a competitive industry. And in those situations, you need to have effective, robust regulation on the side of the consumer.
OK, final point to you, and it's the vital one, and that was a very informative analysis from your perspective of the price structure, the supply structure and regulation. But what do you think the government should do come April, or let's be perhaps more realistic, the end of May? You say 4 million people are already in fuel poverty, when all of them, and maybe more, turn around and say, I can't pay this bill. I simply haven't got the money.
So we have support mechanisms that exist already, some for older people, some for people on benefits. It's about rebates across the energy market. It doesn't reach enough people, and it's not big enough to deal with the problem. We should also remember the government, of course, has had over £1 billion tax windfall directly as a result of this energy price crisis. So the Treasury could put that to work to take the sting out some of these prices. So you do need immediate financial support for those people you're already supporting. Long term, though, Alistair, and you're right, this is something that's going to go on longer. Let's insulate people from these global commodity markets by insulating their homes. We know we have lousy housing stock. That's how you build fuel poverty out of the country. That's how you build out the reliance not only on energy suppliers, but on Putin and the other gas suppliers. So there's a short-term, immediate thing that we just have to do now. And then long-term, how do we stop making ourselves so vulnerable and exposed to global gas prices and possibly profiteering from energy suppliers?
Final question. Have you done the sums on what the cost of helping those consumers would be, the cost to the taxpayer?
The direct impact will be a matter of hundreds of millions of pounds, about £300 million, much less than the tax cake. The big cost is about the energy efficiency program, which we need for net zero, and people are dubious about that. But in order to decarbonize the economy and decarbonize homes, we need millions of pounds. But my point would be, you deal with those people in the most vulnerable circumstances first. Deal with the worst first. The cost of doing it for everybody, every home across the UK, is eye-watering. But to do it for those people in the greatest need, that's what the state's for. It's to support those people who are most vulnerable, who cannot afford to do it for themselves. That's a much smaller, much more manageable amount of money. We've got mechanisms that reach out to those people already. Let's just get on and do it.
Adam Scorer, it is always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for finding time for us this evening, and thanks for your views there. Let's continue with this intriguing debate, and I'm delighted to welcome now Andy Mayer to join in. Andy's the Chief Operating Officer of the Institute for Economic Affairs. Putting it bluntly, you and I are coming from a very similar place economically and politically. I'm fully aware of that and put my cards on the table. But we are now reaping what Thatcher sowed, and it is looking damned painful to many.
Well, I don't think that's quite right, Alistair. The main thing that's happened in the last 20 years is growing intervention and interference in what was a reasonably successful privatisation. So what we've seen is the growth of increasing numbers of energy policy interventions by the government, whether it's on the provision of different types of energy for low carbon purposes, or green home schemes, or other interventions deeper in the supply chain that people often don't notice, such that what we have now is a partially privatised market. But in reality, the government is now even setting energy prices. So the price mechanism is not working in a large number of different areas of energy markets. And this is the mess that the government has created for itself.
The two main interventions that people on my Twitter feed, and as we all know, Twitter is not the world, but they're a bright bunch. The two main government interventions that they are mentioning are the level of VAT that's levied on fuel and being chicken on fracking and nuclear.
Well, all three of those are relevant. So if we take those in turn, VAT, there are two different positions on this, really. One is very simple, get rid of it. Now we've left the EU, we don't have to abide by minimum VAT levels, so we could simply reduce the rate to zero, be done with it, and have cheaper energy as a result. The other side of that coin is
that would be the second biggest possible hit on the public finances. If you abolish VAT, second biggest
there's always
hit.
going to be hits on the public finances. I mean, the welfare costs of increasing energy prices alone will eat up any benefits. I believe Adam mentioned £1 billion would be raised. Yeah. Well, that's wiped out straight away with increasing welfare bills. And welfare is the correct way of addressing high energy prices, not tinkering with the price itself, because that simply distorts the market.
Let me take you one step back, as I did with Adam as well, and just to be clear, because I think on this one we will agree, you can't buck markets in terms of the supplies, whether it's gas coming from Putin or whether it's still diminishing volumes of oil coming from the Middle East or whatever. That you're stuck with.
Correct to a point, but what the government has done is destroyed incentives for new investment in supply. So the point about fracking is this is a government-imposed policy. The government has decided what the regime for fracking should be and is effectively a regulatory ban by putting safety and environmental measures on the industry so extreme that if a ladder fell over next to a fracking site, it would stop production for that day for fear of there being an earthquake. That's nothing to do with markets, that's government policy. On nuclear, little bit different. The government could have increased supply of nuclear faster, but the trouble there is the nuclear industry has yet to come up with safe, affordable forms of nuclear power that can be deployed at speed. It's still a very slow and clunky industry. So it's always the chimera solution to many of our problems. France managed somehow to get it right many decades ago, but they're now paying the price for old retiring nuclear power stations that are being taken offline as we speak. So it's not a panacea. The only solution we have in the interim, before we look at this bright low-carbon nirvana in the future, and we don't yet know how far in the future, is gas. And gas is the most flexible form of supply. It's the one that can be used for baseload. It's the one that can be used for dispatchable power. And it's the one which we have domestic supplies that the government is deliberately blocking for a matter of policy, not just fracking, but also in the North Sea. They're looking at new bids from companies like Shell and throwing up ridiculous net zero interventions and objections by the civil service to stop them investing in new fields. Yeah. And private investors just aren't going to do that.
Yeah. I find it intriguing that there you are, coming from where you are politically and economically, talking about overburdensome regulation on fracking, the introduction of a VAT rate, which could have been got rid of because of Brexit, and really not loosening up the market properly. And finally, it is also the same people who gave the green light to these smaller supply companies, all of whom have gone bust for various reasons. All of that under the government of the sons and heirs and daughters and heirs of Margaret Thatcher. This was a Conservative government these last 20 years that made all of these profound errors.
Well, the Conservative Party, I think, for 20 years was looking for a new ideology to replace Thatcherism, which it regarded as being somewhat tarnished and tainted during the New Labour period in office. And they were looking for a kind of gentler conservatism. And in the process, they found green ideologies instead, of which net zero is the latest incarnation. And that requires you to take a very hardline position on making energy more expensive, because the only way you accelerate net zero beyond the speed that the market is prepared to deliver it is by forcing up prices. So we are now 2 to 3 months into an entirely predictable energy prices crisis, where the only reasonable insight is that the government wants this to happen. They do not care. They want energy prices to rise. They want people to pay more, and they want those higher prices to deliver low carbon energy solutions, including energy efficiency in homes, which, if prices remain this high, people will be incentivized to invest in. So this is not an accident. This is a matter of deliberate government policy. And if they really cared about it, they would be doing a lot more than they're doing at the moment, which is just sitting there, frankly.
And letting people come April, May 2022, literally go cold or live in the dark.
Yep. That is policy.
I'm jaw-dropped. I'm absolutely jaw-dropped. Adam Scorer said he reckons it's between 300 million and a little more to bail out the poorest. Are you seriously saying that, in your view, this government will say, that's the new Tory tomorrow, get real, dim the lights a little, get another blanket?
No, they won't do that to the poorest. What they'll do is find a welfare solution to that, whether it's through an energy incentive scheme or through universal credit itself. What they won't do is bail out the rest of us. Because if you start interfering with prices again, artificially suppressing them, you're going to have to pay for that through the tax system.
Yeah.
So that will transfer the cost across everybody.
Sure.
But that's hidden. Yeah. So what they're going to do instead is increase benefits to say they're doing something, but for everybody else, and that means people who are not necessarily poor but are fairly close to being poor, are going to pay much, much more, up to £300, £400, £500 on their energy bills.
Yeah. Final point, and we've talked about such matters many times in the past, Andy, but I want to put to you this point. When my producer Steve and I were talking about what we wanted to do as our main talking point tonight, and I proposed this, we were chatting around it, and I said, look, make no mistake, in my view, economically and politically, this runs the risk of being the major crisis politically and economically in 2022. Am I pushing it, or am I right?
No, you could well be right. I mean, we can't say what other crises will come along. I mean, the deteriorating situation with Russia and Ukraine, for example, may create a wag the dog moment that distracts the government from the underlying issues of energy policy. But it's looking like a very strong contender as being an absolutely outrageous rise in the cost of living that was utterly avoidable if the government had actually done more to ensure there would be more domestic supply, and they had a backup plan other than simply trying to tinker with the cap to pretend that they're keeping prices down when in fact they're transferring the cost onto the general taxpayer.
Andy Mayer, keep in touch. Watch this space. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Always good to talk to you. Andy Mayer there from the Institute of Economic Affairs. Interestingly, on my social media account, the one word that didn't feature, and I really did look very closely at all of them, was profiteering. Virtually nobody is accusing the power companies of making a profit. All of them are talking about fracking, they're talking about lifting VAT, they're talking about the green levies, they're talking about easing it up on going nuclear, even going back to coal and unleashing. Such was the tide of commentary from you when I wrote on Twitter this afternoon that we would be covering this story, that many of you have got in touch. And again, we thought there were so many that we'd just give a flavour of it. So here's a handful, just briefly. Chris got in touch to say, quote, I'm not one for nationalisation generally, but the government must step in. This can't be left to market forces any longer. Mike wrote, agree licences for further extraction from the North Sea oil and gas. Remove any green energy plans that distort the market. Rory McCallion, who I put my hand up and admit is a friend of mine, he wrote lots and is well worth following, but this is a particularly good one. I am in favour of zero carbon energy, but renewables currently aren't up to the job yet. Nuclear was abandoned for political rather than energy reasons, very much what Andy Mayer was saying there. We need interim arrangements, says Rory, while new nuclear comes on stream. Quickest way is fracked gas, which also gives energy security. And finally, a brilliant two-word solution to the problem from Kevin: get fracking. As always at GB News, we genuinely like to hear what you say, and we pick out the best and we share it with everybody else. So thank you very much indeed to those four, and indeed to everybody else. After the break, we're going to be analysing the latest report on Omicron, the variant and hospitalisation. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Outbreaks of rain and hill snow will affect the far north of Scotland overnight, much milder elsewhere, and fairly foggy in places, whether that's hill fog or low-level fog by the start of Christmas Eve. You can see the mild air across much of the UK, but cold air continues in the far north of Scotland, and with these weather fronts bringing spells of rain from the southwest, well, they're going to increasingly mix with the cold air, and so the snow level coming down through the night across northern parts of Scotland. Expect accumulating snow above 300 metres, 2 to 5 centimetres possible, and 10 centimetres above 500 metres. So watch out if you're travelling on some of the higher routes in northern Scotland on Christmas Eve morning. Otherwise, some dense fog to look out for first thing across central parts of the UK, and a lot of cloud, low cloud covering the hills as well. Some damp weather there for northern England, much of Scotland, but it does peter out. Whilst another active band of rain moves in through the afternoon, southwest England into Wales, central southern England, Northern Ireland later on. That is accompanied by gusty winds. Mild air in the south, staying cold further north. And it's a repeating pattern over the next few days. We've got these active weather fronts moving in, and then they stall and fizzle out across central parts of the UK. They mix with the cold air further north, so don't be surprised if there's a few flakes of snow over the tops of the Pennines as we head into Christmas Day. But Christmas Day promises a cold start, a bright start across northern and central Scotland, some sunshine here. Further south, a lot of cloud, that cloud again covering the hills, and a few flakes of snow possible for the higher ground of northern England. But it's much milder for Wales, southern and southwest England, and here we'll see showers and longer spells of rain with temperatures up to 12 Celsius. Similar on Sunday, showers and mild air in the south, cold further north with some hill snow.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Welcome back. There was more encouraging news in the fight against COVID today from the UK's Health Security Agency. They said that people are up to 70% less likely to be hospitalised if they are infected with the Omicron variant rather than Delta. It's one of several reports that have suggested that Omicron is a milder form of COVID, although it should be noted that the results are largely based on a study of people under 40. And UK Health Security Agency also said that there is evidence that the effect of a third booster jab starts to wane after 10 weeks. So the good news and the bad news. I'm joined now by Dr. Peter Carter, who's the chair of Queen Victoria Hospital in Sussex and for more than 8 years was the Chief Executive and General Secretary of the Royal College of Nursing. Great to see you and thank you for joining us. Is this data on Omicron and hospitalisations, in your view, the turning point?
I think it potentially could be, and I think it's the next couple of days that it will become clearer. Can I just mention something? I am not the chair of the Queen Victoria Hospital in East Grinstead. You've got some out-of-date news there. I was asked to do that, but it didn't come together. So I thought I'd better clarify that because it might confuse your viewers. So look back to the.
I apologise profusely, and thank you. No, you elegantly corrected me. So let's go back to the data, though, if you'd be so kind. But thank you for making that clarification.
Yeah, Alistair. Look, what is now emerging? It's quite clear that this mutation is milder than previous variants, and that is very, very good news. And the evidence today from this report that you've just referred to is that people are 70% less likely to be admitted to hospital. Now, that's the very good news. The not so good news is that this variant spreads faster than previous variants, and it's rising exponentially. And we know that today there are 100,000 new cases reported. Hospitals are running hot already. With many of them over 90% of beds full. And so there's very little slack in the system. So although the variant is milder, more people are likely to contract it. And as a consequence, more people will be admitted to hospital. So it's a mixed picture. And can I go on to say that, look, I've been very critical of this government, particularly in the early phases of COVID. They've made some very serious mistakes, and that will come out in due course in the public inquiry. However, on this issue, I think they're handling it right. I think they're being very, very cautious. I know that Boris Johnson's got problems with his backbenchers, but they're being very, very cautious. And over the next few days, we will see what is emerging, and it could be that they emerge with this and that they've called it right. If, however, things really do begin to deteriorate, then they've got to be prepared, God forbid, to go into some stricter measures
Absolutely.
and a potential lockdown.
And Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland will be proved to be right and Johnson wrong in the crapshoot, because statistically that's what it is. It's a crapshoot.
It is, and it's very high risk all round. I mean, look, I've driven up from the West Country this morning or this afternoon up to Hertfordshire, and listening to the news. For the first time in a long time, I was hearing people in Scotland being very heavily critical of Nicola Sturgeon, and she won't be pleased when nightclub owners and people were praising Boris Johnson and criticising her. That's new territory.
Yeah.
However, if it doesn't pull off, that could rebound on him. So I think the next few days are going to be absolutely fascinating to watch, and we're not quite sure where it's going. But the evidence emerging, particularly from South Africa and here in the UK, would appear that we just might be able to dodge a bullet on this one.
Lovely quote there. Final question, and a quick one if you'd be so kind. How long will it take hospitals to get back to normal service?
Oh, look, in terms of normal service, in terms of the waiting list, that is going to take several years. There are people now on waiting lists for hips and all kinds of other elective surgery that I'm sorry to say, they're going to be on those waiting lists, some people for 2 years and more. And that's very, very sad, and that's the consequence of this. What we should also remember, of course, is that hospitals are still doing a great job. Oh, can I just make one other quick point? Because I know you
very briefly, Peter.
Right. The public could do far more by wearing masks. I mentioned I drove up this morning. I stopped at a service station. The number of men not washing their hands after going to the loo. You see this. So the public can have a bit more responsibility and a bit more control on this, and that can help us get out of this mess.
Peter Carter, great to talk to you, and apologies for getting the label wrong at the beginning, and thank you for clarifying it with such dignity. Good to talk to you. Keep in touch, and thanks for your time. Let's move on that penultimate point that Peter Carter made, which is to say that in his view, frontline experience, it is a matter of years before we can get our hospitals back to, as it were, normal business. I'm delighted, therefore, to be joined now by the leading cancer specialist, a sector that has suffered particularly, my friend, Professor Carol Sikora. You've been saying that to us and to others for quite some time. What confidence, first of all, though, do you glean as a frontline specialist from this data on Omicron and the impact it's likely to have on hospitalisations, Carol?
So I think Peter's got it absolutely right. The next 48 hours are critical. Boris has probably got it right, whether we like it or not. He's probably got it right in not rushing into some sort of Christmas lockdown. The Welsh and the Scottish have got it wrong. Could all be proven wrong, but I really don't think so. There's data from South Africa, there's data from Israel that's further advanced by about 3 weeks to our Omicron, and ours is coming. And you heard the study today from the replacement of Public Health England, which shows that this is not the same thing, the same disease as Delta, the previous one. And Alistair, what's really happening is the virus is trying to learn how to live with us. It's mutated, so it can be much more benign, and it wants to stay around. And we're going to have it around. There's no point locking things down, not even nightclubs. We've got to learn to live with this. And
at what point, Carol, can you start to really getting to grips with your waiting list, your colleagues' waiting list, both in terms of diagnoses and treatment?
That's the problem. Cancer patients don't know they've had cancer till they've got on a waiting list. And it's very difficult to prioritise. We have something called the 2-week wait. For GPs can refer on a patient that they think has cancer will be seen within 2 weeks. But it's not foolproof, and only about 25% of cancer patients come through that 2-week wait. So we've got to really get everybody through the system to get biopsies, or taking a sample of tissue to prove it's cancer, and imaging, MRI scans, CT scans, to prove where the cancer is before we can start treatment. And that's the roadblock at the moment, getting through that. I suspect by summer we'll have got through the urgent matters. It'll take, as Peter said quite eloquently, it'll probably take several years before we're truly back to normal for all those things that we use the NHS for.
It's not a cheap question. It's a genuine one because you and I have discussed this for so long now over these last 2 years. Are you more optimistic tonight than you've been thus far?
I am. I looked at the data at 4 o'clock that comes out. I can't resist going to my phone and pick it up. And sure, the numbers in hospital, numbers going into hospital in the 5 days ago, which is the most latest data, is about 800 to 1,000. But it's bouncing around, so that's all right. As long as it doesn't go to 10,000, which some of our pessimistic epidemiologists are saying, we'll save the NHS, we'll get back to normal. And then we're going to have a real effort to do recovery. Yeah. And that's what's missing now.
Couldn't be in better hands than yours, Carol. Great to talk to you. Have a great evening, and thanks for breaking into it to talk to me. That's the great Professor Carol Sakura, who always finds something positive in any scenario, but that was for real. After the break, we'll bring you part of my exclusive interview with the Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, as he talks about Boris Johnson and why he wants the public to trust politicians.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Last night on this programme, we talked about MPs, the good, the bad, and frankly, the indifferent. We took an upbeat view, though, with Dr. Liam Fox and his important work on his private member's bill on Down syndrome. But whatever the issues, our themes tonight of energy and COVID or whatever other ones there may be, MPs will have their say, and so too will government. The debates will get nasty and partisan for sure, and rightly so. So I'm going to leave you with the thoughts of the man who seeks to keep them focused and in order. A week ago, I was lucky enough to sit down and talk to Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle. He talked to me exclusively for GB News, and I think it's worth leaving you with his thoughts on what he wants from ministers and from the Mother of Parliaments. You had to, a fortnight ago, remind the Prime Minister, whilst he was in charge of the country, you were in charge in this place.
Still have not heard why the Honourable Gentleman will not tell...
Minister, Prime Minister, sit down. Prime Minister, I'm not going to be challenging maybe the Prime Minister of this country, but in this House, I'm in charge.
Was that difficult to say, or was it a profound duty?
It was very easy to say, because it's right, isn't it? You know, in the end, look, you know, the authority of the chair can be challenged, but in the end, the authority is with the chair. And I just need to remind people that I am looking after this House. He's got a country to run. don't try and run the chamber as well.
I interrupt only to say this, because when I heard you say it, and you know I love this place as well, and I'm a bit of an amateur historian, it reminded me of Lentil in 1642, telling King Charles I, I have neither eyes to see nor tongue to speak in this place, but as this house is pleased to direct me. You were reminding Boris Johnson of a profound constitutional truth.
Not a bad person to replicate, is it? Somebody so brave who kept his head. Hopefully I will continue to keep mine as well. But it's about, that was challenging the authority of the chair. It doesn't matter whether it's a backbencher or the Prime Minister. The fact is, it's keeping good order in that chamber that mattered to me. And of course, Speaker Lentil is always going to be my icon. And I've got to say, you know, the privilege to even be compared with him, you know, is way beyond my belief of ever expecting anyone to say that. What I would say is, I was doing it because it was the right thing to do at the right time, at the right moment.
There's another right thing to do which you feel profoundly important, and it goes back to Matt Hancock. You had to remind, you make your statements in this place, but just last week you insisted that statements be made to the House first, not to the press. I respect the backbenchers even if you don't, you said, looking at the Treasury bench, the government bench.
Well, it's a good way of reminding them that I'm representing their foot soldiers. And sometimes generals have got to be reminded the army has to be supported, whichever side of the house that comes from. They've got to be looked after. And I'm overseeing that as the umpire in that chair. And that's what mattered to me. Because in the end, it's their backbenchers that complain to me how they're being treated by their leaders. And therefore, I have a duty of care to them. And it may not go down well with senior politicians, but in the end, that's the price I'm happy to pay. If they want to fall out with me, so be it. I do it in the nicest possible way.
Well, that's nicest possible way. I thought that was maybe where you were going. But final point, because there's lots more to talk about, and I know time is tight because you've got to go and do the day job in just a moment. But my final point on this is, just 48 hours ago, this House has become secondary once again to TV news. Not acceptable. If that's the game we're going to play, I quote you, Speaker, we're going to have to play hardball. You're not taking any prisoners in this, are you, Lindsay?
No, because I was elected to serve this House. I was elected to serve all the members of Parliament. That's why I gave up my political membership. I'm independent, but I am the voice of all those MPs. They are elected to serve in this House, not elected to listen to Sky or News, GBNews, whoever it be. They were elected to come into this House to listen to ministers and prime ministers making the statements here. Because in the end, their constituents sent them to this House. And quite rightly, this House must hear it first. And that's why it's a challenge.
What does hardball mean?
Well, let's say, I think time will tell. And I think, like everything, if you're going to try and make my life difficult, I could also make your life difficult. And if you want to take this House and you want to disregard what I expect you to do not be upset when certain decisions will be taken. And that could be granting more UQs and more UQs. There are different ways of doing it. I don't fall out with people. Life's too short. I want to work with people. But if you're going to work against me, I could also work against you as well.
Not Speaker Lentil, that reminds me of The Godfather. It's only business. and business comes first. You had to deal with the prorogation question that ended up in front of the Supreme Court. Owen Paterson brought back the issues of lobbying, almost cash for questions. Did you, Lindsay Hoyle, think all of that stuff was behind this place?
I always want to move forward. The problem is sometimes history repeats itself. What we've got to do is learn from the problems that have been created or the mess that sometimes this House gets us into. What I want to do is, look, and I start off exactly what I said at the beginning. I believe in this House. I believe in respect of this House, but I also believe that politicians may have disagreements, but in the end I expect tolerance and respect, but I also want the public to respect us. So we must do the right thing, and let's get things right. And that's why I'm more than happy, I'm very pleased that we're going to look into the situation of second jobs, whatever, and the House will make that decision. I will respect that decision. Of course, we've all got our own views. But in the end, the House must put itself in order. And I want it to do that. Because, as I say, I want us to be the envy of the world. And once again, when people talk about democracy, I want them to talk about Westminster. I want them to talk about the House of Commons. The pride that I've got in this place, I want that pride to be shared around the world. So it's up to us. Let's make sure we do things right going forward.
Yeah. You stress rightly the importance of trust, but at GB News and I'm sure elsewhere, we get masses of correspondence from our viewers saying, just don't trust them anymore, just don't trust the place anymore, whether it's parties that senior ministers either did or didn't attend, or whether it's allegations of drugs being found on the loos or bullying or sexism, what have you. That starts to reflect on ordinary members as well, and it's your duty to make sure they stand in line too and restore the trust in this important place.
And that's what it is. I've got pride in Parliament. I want the public to have that same pride. I want them to have the same belief in Parliament. I want them to have trust in politicians. And we've got to prove that we're worthy of that trust. And that means we've got to tidy things up. On the drugs, I did meet with the police. Nobody's ever been arrested and nobody's been charged with possession or dealing on this estate. So what we've got to do, I've had the meeting with the police, we will reflect on where we go from here. It could well be that the allegations may or may not be true. What the House of Commons does, it does reflect society. I've always said that. When I first stood, I said, do not be shocked that we'll have people who may have a drink problem, we may also have people who have a drug problem, whether they work here or not. We have a duty of care to try and ensure that we support people if they have a problem. But I certainly don't want drugs on this estate. It's something I've never taken, so it's much easier for me to have a different view to others maybe. But what I want is a nicer Parliament, a Parliament that I believe that doesn't reflect society, because people say you should always reflect. There are certain parts of society you may not want to reflect. And I don't know, and I've got to see the proof, there is a problem. The police say there isn't a problem, and they say they've never found or charged anybody on this estate with drugs. So I can only take that on board. But I do know if people do have a problem, whether it's drink, we need to support them with that, and the same with drugs. So I have a genuine care for everybody who works on this estate. And it's a village. We've got to look after this village. Health and well-being is one of my top agendas to support people. Because during this pandemic, we know the effect it's had on MPs, on staff of this House, staff of those members of Parliament. They're at the forefront of abuse, threats and intimidation. So health and well-being matters to me in supporting them to get them through and putting better resilience into the House and giving an even greater support right across, because health and well-being does matter, will matter.
A great man. I'm back at 5 o'clock tomorrow. Patrick Christie is here at 9 o'clock. But first, let's bring you right up to date with the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Outbreaks of rain and hail snow will affect the far north of Scotland overnight, much milder elsewhere, and fairly foggy in places, whether that's hill fog or low-level fog by the start of Christmas Eve. You can see the mild air across much of the UK, but cold air continues in the far north of Scotland, and with these weather fronts bringing spells of rain from the southwest, well, they're going to increasingly mix with the cold air, and so the snow level coming down through the night across northern parts of Scotland. Expect accumulating snow above 300 metres, 2 to 5 centimetres possible, and 10 centimetres above 500 metres. So watch out if you're travelling on some of the higher routes in northern Scotland on Christmas Eve morning. Otherwise, some dense fog to look out for first thing across central parts of the UK, and a lot of cloud, low cloud covering the hills as well. Some damp weather there for northern England, much of Scotland, but it does peter out. Whilst another active band of rain moves in through the afternoon, southwest England into Wales, central southern England, Northern Ireland later on. That is accompanied by gusty winds. Mild air in the south, staying cold further north. And it's a repeating pattern over the next few days. We've got these active weather fronts moving in, and then they stall and fizzle out across central parts of the UK. They mix with the cold air further north, so don't be surprised if there's a few flakes of snow over the tops of the Pennines as we head into Christmas Day. But Christmas Day promises a cold start, a bright start across northern and central Scotland, some sunshine here. Further south, a lot of cloud, that cloud again covering the hills, and a few flakes of snow possible for the higher ground of northern England. But it's much milder for Wales, southern and southwest England, and here we'll see showers and longer spells of rain with temperatures up to 12 Celsius. Similar on Sunday, showers and mild air in the south, cold further north with some hill snow.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.